Thank you, Leslie. Good to see you. I'm Frank Shaheen, and I am an alcoholic. And my recovery is in Alcoholics Anonymous. So I will share in that manner what I have learned in Alcoholics Anonymous and how I stay sober. I in my story, briefly, I'll tell you, there's a lot of drugs. And I got sober on January, my sobriety date is January the 20th of 1983. And there was no other 12-step available in my area. So it was prior to NA getting big, but AA has done for me what I need, and I love it, very devoted to it. The first time I spoke was in a little town in South Carolina called Kershaw, and it was down in the basement of a church, and there was a treatment center that brought their patients. And I was about 6 months sober, and my sponsor told me to say three things to qualify myself. So I'll tell you those three things. The first was that besides that I'm an alcoholic, and was that I have a sponsor. His name is John R. He lives in Columbia, South Carolina, where I live, Alice and I live. And that I have a home group. It is the Men at Work group that meets at the Coal Club in Columbia on Thursdays at noon. And also my sobriety date, which I just told you, January the 20th of 1983. So I did that. Now, when the meeting was over, he took me in the kitchen in the basement and said, you were here to share your experience, strength, and hope, not do a fifth step. So I learned a lot that night. I think I must have told too much specific and not enough recovery. And I've learned from that. So tonight I'll talk mostly recovery. But I will tell you that I had a long history of drinking. I started drinking at the age of 13 and drank for 22 years. I never did want to drink to have a glass of dinner wine or to drink 2 beers. Every time I drank, I wanted to get high. I wanted to get out of it from that very first time until I got sober. And so when I went to college. I went too soon. I was 17, and I graduated from high school at 17, and I turned 18 right after I got there, but I was way too immature to be in college. I should have done something else for a year, but I was there, and I drank all the time. I drank every night, and I flunked out, pure and simple, because of my partying, because of the way I lived. After I flunked out, I was working with my dad, and somebody asked me in his presence what my GPR was. And he said, we don't know what that is, but his blood alcohol content was higher than his GPR. So that was probably true. And so I stayed in it, and I drank, and I flunked out. I went to work at his store. I partied. I hung out with the same people like me that partied and drank every night and stayed drunk. And I continued that way for a long time. A lot of things happened during my drinking, and I will not go into every one of them, but the big book talks about our escapades. And I had many escapades and got in a lot of trouble. When I was in 1979, I think was the first time that I had ever thought about changing, thought about doing something about the mess my life was in, the mess I had caused in my life. And the reason I had that epiphany was because I was sitting in the Kershaw County Jail with a heavy drug charges, and I was detoxing from methadone without anything. They just put me in jail and left me for 8 days and didn't give me anything to come off of the methadone. was not very pleasant. And so I believe that what happened during that time, or when I got out shortly thereafter, I went to court. My lawyer asked for a speedy trial, and I got 5 years probation. And I'm glad that there was mercy instead of justice, because if it hadn't have been, I would have gone to prison. If probably should have gone to prison. My lawyer was my cousin. He was a politician, was kind of powerful. His brother was chairman of county council, and they put pressure on the judge and the sheriff to not give me prison time. And what they did, as far as we talk about turning points, what that did is that got me to a turning point. Not a sharp turning point where I went into sobriety at that time, but a turning point that I started looking at what I could do different, what I could do to not go to prison. I didn't want to I didn't know what sobriety was. I didn't know what staying clean was. I just knew that if I didn't change my life, I was going to prison. And the judge told me that. So I stopped with the drugs and I just went to drinking. And when I did, I drank a lot for the next couple of years. I drank just bunches of liquor all the time. I wouldn't do drugs. Near the end of that time, before I went to treatment, I did, in the heroin world, they call it dipping and dabbing. I did some dipping and dabbing. I tried to use and it didn't work. It didn't work. And so it was a couple of years. It was in 1982, January 1982, I went to treatment for the second time. The first time in 1977, when I'd gotten busted for drugs, and the policeman was a friend, and he let me off if I got help. So I went to a treatment center and got kicked out after the third day for smoking marijuana at the treatment center. So in that time in 1982, I was in bad shape. I was at the point that I couldn't drink. I couldn't hold it down. I don't know if any of you have ever gotten to the point with alcohol where you go to take that first drink and it just is hard to get it down, and it wants to come back out. It wants to come out my nose or something. And it was bad. And I was at that point. I couldn't drink, but I could not drink. And so one night I was at a bar there in camp near where I lived, and I was sipping on, I loved Jack Daniels, and I had a Jack Daniels and Coke, and I was sipping on it. And a buddy sat down next to me and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I can't hold it down. I'm just taking little teeny sips till I can get some down so I can drink." And he said, "Have you ever tried a White Russian?" He said, "It's got cream in it, so it'll coat your stomach." You know, we come up with some really cool stuff, don't we, when we're out there? And so I said, okay, and I ordered a White Russian. Well, then until I got sober, that's all I drank, because I could keep that down. And I drank a lot of it. I would buy 2.5 gallons of vodka, 2.5 gallons of Kahlua every week. And so it went downhill. I made a lot of bad decisions. I got married 2 times during that time. Both of those marriages ended in divorce. The second one, not until after I was sober a little while. The best thing about those 2 marriages is that I've got 2 beautiful children. I've got a daughter who, Alice, and I just got back from spending 5 days with her, lives in Mobile, Alabama, with 2 wonderful grandsons that are very smart and talented. She went to Carolina, she went to college, and she graduated with 3.8. A few years ago, I was in a job and I put in for a promotion, and they said I needed to have 60 hours of college. They thought I would be good with the job, but I had to have 60 credits. And well, you know, denial is really pretty good sometimes. You can hide behind something. And so I sent off my transcript, and I had 12 hours, and my GPA was 2.25. So my dad was right about the BAC. I had a horrible, and I say that because my daughter was a 3.8 and I was at that. Now, the other side of that is sobriety pays off. Sobriety has given me so many opportunities and opened so many doors. And when I was in my 40s, I finished my undergraduate and got a master's degree. And that is truly a byproduct of my sobriety. That's a byproduct of Alcoholics Anonymous, to be able to work full time, raise my son as a single dad, and finish school. And I had support of my parents too, but that is truly Alcoholics Anonymous working in my life. And so in 1982, I was with the second wife, and I was just in bad shape. And she found out about a treatment center in Charleston, actually on James Island, Fenwick Hall. It's no longer there. And I went. And I think that was that turning point that started in court, started to turn a little more at that point, because I started going more towards changing really for the better. I was there for 28 days. I loved it. They introduced us to Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous. And I loved those programs, and got started on the steps. And it was just a definite time that changed my life. One of the biggest and most important things about that treatment was I got there on a Thursday and probably passed out. And when they got up the next morning, I was in detox, and I went to the nurse's station to get my meds, of course. And someone called my name, and it was a gentleman from my hometown that I knew somewhat, not real well. I knew his brother better than I did him, but I knew him too. And he was there, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, what are you doing here?" And we became roommates, and we became very, very close friends. When we got out, he stayed sober, and I didn't. My relapse was marijuana. Not long after I got out, I think maybe the next day, I'm not sure, I smoked marijuana, and it just wasn't enough. I did it for a little while, and it wasn't enough. And then I did something else, and then I was drinking beer, and then, you know, the story. And I was still going to meetings some. I would go to meetings, and well, I actually picked up a 90-day chip, and I wasn't sober. And I tell you what, it weighed down. I put it in my pocket, and getting home was hard because that chip weighed so much. I couldn't hardly stand it. And I called Walter, the guy that was my roommate, and told him that I hadn't been sober. He said, "Well, everybody knows that but you." And so I went back to AA and picked up another white chip. And that's the way it went for the go for a couple of, I'd pick up a white chip and go for a couple of weeks and stay sober. And then I'd fool myself that I could do just a little bit, and I couldn't. And as soon as I did, it was off and running again. And it just got worse and worse. I used to hear a guy speak. He's no longer in this world, and he was sober a long time. And he spoke at my home group once a year. And he said every time he drank again, it got worse. And he said one night he just talked and said that, and this lady came up to him afterward. His name was Old Norm. Said, "Oh, Norm, I really like to talk, but I teach English, and there's no such word as worse." He said, you didn't drink the same liquor I did then. So it always got worse. And so January the 20th of 1983, I ended up in a treatment center. I actually ended up in Detox. And it was not a nice detox. It would not, it didn't look like anything where Leslie works, I'll guarantee you that. It was terrible. And it was famous for its roaches. It was an old hospital that had been shut down for many years, and it had tremendously big roaches. And I got in there and passed out, and I woke up the next morning. I didn't have any clothes. It was an ice storm, nobody to bring me anything. And I was thinking that I needed to put on clean clothes and take a bath, but I didn't have any. So I said, well, I'll just take a shower and put these old clothes back on. Maybe eventually I can get somebody to bring me something. And I went to get off the bed, and I looked down, and there was a roach about that big crawling towards me, towards the bed. And I got back up on the bed, and I looked down at it, and I said, am I in a place that has roaches that big, or am I hallucinating? And my next thought was, it doesn't matter. If I'm hallucinating a roach, or if I'm in a place that has roaches that big, I need to do something. And that was where my sobriety started. And I like to say that my first spiritual experience was when God sent me a roach. And so I truly believe that he was giving me that message with that creature crawling across the floor. And so that was a Thursday. Friday night, as I said, it was an ice storm. And but we went downstairs for an AA meeting, and two gentlemen from the Columbia AA community came in and did that meeting. And that was so impressive to me, that they would go out of their house on Friday night at 8 o'clock in the middle of an ice storm to carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that really impressed me. And I wanted to be able to do that. And so I stayed sober from then thus far till now. And it's been a wonderful journey. That man that I talked about, that was my roommate, his first name was Walter, and Walter became my sponsor not long after I got out. I went back to treatment for 2 weeks, and when I got out of that treatment, Walter and I became even closer. We were close during that year I was using. I was working at my dad's grocery store, and he would come visit me quite often, and we'd talk. And I was usually honest with him at that point that I messed up again. And so one day he came by the store after I'd been home for a few weeks or a couple months, I don't know. And I asked him to be my sponsor. He said, no, I can't do it. We're too close. We're too good of friends. And truth be known, you almost got me drunk last year, all your shenanigans. And the store had a parking lot in the back, and he got in his truck and left, and I looked out, and he was coming, had turned around at the end of the parking lot, was coming back, and he came in, he said, all right, I'll be your temporary sponsor. And I said, okay. So a little over 20, well, when he died, he had almost a month short of 21 years of sobriety. He died, I had almost 20 years of sobriety, and he had almost 21. And he was my sponsor all that whole time. He was a big fourth step person and fifth step. He truly believed in journaling and writing and working those two steps together. And never did he tell me to do a fourth or fifth step that he didn't do it with me. I shared my first fifth step with him, which I think was another time that I had a very spiritual feeling. And maybe it was just a feeling of relief or freedom. but I had a very, very spiritual feeling that afternoon too. And we did 6 and 7. And so he saved my life. As I said, he passed away in December of 2002. He had lung cancer and died. And he was in the hospital on the oncology floor, and I would go see him. Well, his brother and my current sponsor and I would go see him every morning and sit and talk. And he was really had a dry sense of humor, could laugh at himself. And one day we were there, and he said, "I feel sorry for you bums." I said, "You feel sorry for us?" He said, "Yeah, y'all got to stay down here and all this stuff. I'm getting ready to be rocketed into another dimension." And so he had that kind of personality, or that kind of humor. So his son had asked us, the AA people, he thanked us for all we'd done and asked us, he said, "Dad's dying and it's not going to be long. Just let it be family." And that's what we did. But another guy that I now sponsor, was he sponsored too, called me, and I was home, and he said, "Hey, Bo, you need to call him." I said, "Call who?" He said, "Call Walter. I just called over there and he answered the phone." So I called his room at the hospital, and it didn't ring a half the time. He said, "I'm still here." And I said, "Good Lord, thank you, Walter. I'm glad you're here." And we talked for a while. Tears were streaming down my face. I had to go out in the yard to talk to him because I was crying so much. But I thanked him. I said, "Walter, you've done so much for me. I thank you." And he said, "Well, you've done a lot for me too. And I thank you." And then he said, "It's time." And I said, "For what?" And he said, "To get a new sponsor." And that cracked me up there for sure. I said, "No, I can't do that. You're my sponsor and you always will be." And he said, "No, you need to get a new one." So the day of his funeral, I asked my current sponsor to be my sponsor. And I like to say that Walter taught me a lot in sobriety. He taught me a lot about staying sober, a lot. He taught me how to stay sober. He taught me how to live. And then he taught me how to die, because he died with dignity. And that was such a strong, strong message. And I miss him every day. I quote him in meetings all the time. And I love the man very much. I'm sorry he's gone, but I'm very grateful that I had him in my life. I work the steps. I go to meetings. I go to several meetings a week. I've been doing Zoom meetings. I'm triple vaxxed. I got the booster, and so I've been going back to some live meetings, but I still do some Zoom meetings. Meetings are very important in my life. I know that's not everybody, but that's me. And I stay involved with the steps. I sponsor about 10 guys. Most of them been sober a while and don't need me much. I pray. I wake in the morning. I do what it says on page 86. At night, upon retiring, I do what it says and look back through my day and ask God to show me where I need to make an apology and help me make it. And then in the morning, I ask him to give me direction and take away my defects of character that stand in the way of me helping others, and to give me what I need to solve any problem. So I do those things on page 86 each morning. Like I said, I've got a lot of sponsees. I do work the steps. Now I'll close with this. I don't always act like I should. And I do that 10th step. Show me where I need to make an apology. And that happened to me today. Alice is my partner. We live together and own a home together and have a great relationship, but we didn't go to the altar and get all that paperwork. we might as well be married, but we never did go through the ritual. And so she's probably got more sense than that. So we're at the beach. You might be able to hear the waves in the background. We got the door open, and but we're not here on pleasure. Even though the ocean is pretty. A very dear friend of mine passed away a couple of days ago, and we came down for the visitation and went to that this afternoon, and then came and got a room, and we'll go back on tomorrow. He was a wonderful man too. He was 40 years sober, and he was a doctor, and I worked with him in the past. But he was just a gentle, wonderful soul. I will miss him. A few years ago, I had the opportunity in my last job. I used to visit treatment centers, and I had an opportunity to visit a treatment center in Virginia that had equine therapy. And we went out to the farm, and the woman was telling us everything in the room and in the boardroom, and then she said, "Y'all want to go out and meet the horses?" And I said, "Yeah." And I'd been around horses a little bit in my life. But when we went out and met the horses, and she said, "Does anybody want to try equine therapy?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And another gentleman that was with us said he did. And she said, "Okay, pick a horse and go talk to your horse. Don't touch the horse, just go talk to that horse." And so I was going towards a horse. She said, "Well, Frankie, that horse's name is Bonnie." And I said, "Okay." So I went over and I talked to Bonnie. It was not long after my mama passed away, and I was a mama's boy. I love my mama. I miss her still. And one of my best friends had committed suicide, and I had been with him the night before, and that still weighs very heavily on me. I miss him too. So I went over to Bonnie, and I was talking to Bonnie, and I was telling her those things. And after just a little bit, the lady said, "Well, come on back." And when I walked over to the group, there was 5 of us, I think 6 of us. 3 of the others had tears running down their cheeks. And then the other guy that kicked the horse, nothing happened for him. And so she said, "Tell us about your experience." And so I did. And I said, Bonnie I felt a real connection. I felt some relief. And she said, "Well, where's your horse now?" And I'd left the horse over by the fence. And I said, "Over by the fence." She said, "Turn around." And that horse had walked up behind me. And if she had raised her nose, she'd have knocked me over. She was right there. And boy, did I really start crying then. And then she said, "We go back and you can talk to Bonnie again, and you can pet her this time and tell her how much she means." And I did that. And I will tell you that was definitely a spiritual experience for me. That was very powerful and very helpful. And with that, Leslie, I'll turn it over to you. Thank y'all all for being here and listening to me.